For countless centuries, the hidden canyons of the sun-scorched West knew only one unyielding sound: the relentless and echoing heartbeat of hardened bronze teeth biting deeply into the unyielding bedrock of the desolate mountain, carving the eternal resting places of the living gods. It was the rhythm of absolute eternity, the meticulous carving of divine immortality.
Silence.
But on this searing day, the unstoppable heartbeat of the empire simply ceases. The fine white limestone dust settles heavily in the suffocating, stagnant air of the deep corridor, coating the sweat-streaked, emaciated torsos of the silent artisans as the flickering torchlight reveals the sharp, protruding cages of their starving ribs. A master draftsman, his dark eyes hollowed by the agonizing gnaw of deep hunger, steps from the profound shadows of the burial chamber and releases his heavy grip, allowing his sacred tool to plummet into the blinding white dust. The machinery of the afterlife grinds to a terrifying halt, held captive by the desperate frailty of mortal flesh. The men who forge the eternal afterlife are starving in the valley of death. A sprawling kingdom constructed upon the absolute foundation of supreme obedience suddenly holds its breath. For these desperate, starving makers of eternity have finally chosen to let the waiting gods suffer in the silent darkness. Beyond the royal necropolis lies the isolated village of Set Mat, the place of truth. Trapped within a brutal, sun-baked crucible of towering cliffs, the stifling stone dwellings bake beneath the merciless, volumetric glare of the midday sun, casting sharp, unforgiving geometric shadows across the empty, dust-choked pathways of the settlement. Here reside the chosen few, the elite craftsmen entrusted with the ultimate cosmic responsibility. Yet their communal granaries stand hollow and hollowed, echoing with the terrible emptiness of an empire that has inexplicably failed its most vital servants. We shape the very corridors of the cosmos, yet our children weep for the simple taste of barley bread. Deep underground, the unfinished tomb of Ramses breathes like a suffocating stone throat. The oppressive, inescapable heat of the subterranean tunnels presses inward against the lungs. A physical weight compounded by the thick, swirling clouds of pulverized limestone that drift violently through the harsh, chiaroscuro beams of the sputtering oil lamps. Every precise swing of the heavy wooden mallet demands a violent expenditure of precious bodily energy. A terrifying transaction of rapidly diminishing life force traded directly for the flawless, polished geometry of the pharaoh's eternal resting place. The divine walls consume our fading strength, drinking the sweat of our exhaustion to fuel the king's resurrection. But a starving body cannot carve the intricate pathways of the divine underworld. In the administrative shadows, the nervous scribes drag their crushed reeds across the woven flesh of the papyrus, their hands trembling as they tally the catastrophic deficit of monthly grain, terrified by the bureaucratic reality of this unprecedented failure. To document this mortal starvation is to document a fatal fracture in Ma'at itself. The soot-black ink bleeds into the fibrous pathways of the scroll, locking the horrifying truth of empty storehouses into permanent, damning administrative records, quantifying the exact mathematical failure of the living God to feed his sacred workforce. Every missing measure of spelt is a heavy stone placed upon the fragile scales of cosmic justice. The agonizing cramp of an empty stomach battles viciously against the deeply ingrained generational terror of divine retribution, tearing at the psychological fabric of men whose entire ancestral lineage has been defined by their unquestioning service to the absolute throne. This is not merely a refusal to work, it is an agonizing spiritual rebellion. They crouch in the suffocating darkness of the burial shafts, their calloused hands tracing the rough, unpainted outlines of the netherworld gods, fully realizing that their desperate earthly defiance threatens to hurl the entire universe into chaotic, unstructured darkness. If we do not strike the stone, the sun will not rise in the underworld tomorrow. The profound weight of eternity presses down upon their frail, emaciated shoulders. A crushing burden of responsibility that demands they sacrifice their own fleeting mortal existence to ensure the unending celestial journey of their supreme sovereign. Yet, the primal scream of a starving family silences the demands of the gods. The absolute breaking point finally shatters the eternal silence of the sacred, forbidden valley. Moving with the terrifying, unstoppable momentum of a flooding river, the weary artisans rise collectively from the stifling, dust-choked bowels of the earth, abandoning their sacred tools to the encroaching shadows as they turn their backs on the waiting king. They march upward toward the blinding aperture of the tomb entrance, their sweat-drenched skeletal frames emerging from the profound darkness of the underworld into the searing, unforgiving brilliance of the midday sun. A unified army of desperate, hungry ghosts, we walk away from the darkness, carrying the heavy fate of the kingdom upon our backs. They descend upon the colossal mortuary temples, occupying the holy sanctuaries of the state. They sit in quiet, immovable defiance beneath the towering, painted columns of the Ramesseum, their fragile, unwashed bodies forming a desperate barricade of mortal flesh against the overwhelming, monolithic stone architecture that glorifies the very administration that starves them. The armed guards of the Magi stand paralyzed in the shimmering desert heat, gripping their spears with uncertain, trembling hands, entirely unequipped to slaughter the only holy craftsmen capable of forging the divine vessels required for the pharaoh's afterlife. To strike us down is to sever the sacred cord that binds the earth to the eternal heavens. Flesh and bone now stand as the ultimate blockade against the architecture of the gods. The panicked viziers arrive in frantic, rattling chariots, their fine pleated linen soaked in the terrified sweat of political disaster, screaming hollow promises across the dusty courtyards, while the silent, starving stonecutters simply stare back with the unyielding patience of bedrock. They are no longer merely men. They have transformed into the terrifying embodiment of cosmic imbalance, living, breathing proof that the divine mandate of the pharaoh has fundamentally fractured, demanding earthly justice before celestial order can ever be rightfully restored. The makers of eternity demand their daily bread before they carve another divine breath. The unforgiving sun burns away the desperate cries of the ancient, striking craftsmen. The harsh, stark lines of the ancient chiaroscuro shadows slowly begin to soften and dissolve, melting rapidly through the heavy, relentless passage of millennia as the volatile, sweat-stained air of the violent rebellion evaporates into the dry, sterile atmosphere of modernity. The microscopic limestone dust that once choked the suffocating lungs of starving artisans now settles peacefully upon the smooth, polished glass lenses of wandering tourists, who shuffle casually through the brilliantly illuminated, fully excavated corridors of the massive royal complex. Thousands of fleeting years collapse into a single, breathless moment of silent, wandering, disconnected observation. The world walks blindly over the buried ashes of humanity's first monumental labor strike,
devours the stone. The gold.
Modern eyes gaze upwards in profound, breathless wonder at the flawlessly painted ceilings of the burial chamber. Entirely oblivious to the agonizing, gnawing hunger and the terrifying spiritual dread that once fueled the violently trembling hands of the forgotten painters. They marvel openly at the meticulous, rigid geometry of the carved underworld, seeing only the glorious, unyielding triumph of divine pharaonic majesty. Blind to the terrifying, breathless week when the absolute power of the empire was successfully brought to its knees. The true cost of immortality is utterly invisible to those who only look upon the finished stone. History remembers the golden masks of kings, but it forgets the starving hands of men.
Time devours the stone.
The only true witness survives not in monumental stone, but in fragile, woven weeds.
Only the
Far away, resting silently beneath the sterile, protective glare of thick museum glass, a single, shattered fragment of administrative papyrus bears the frantic, terrified ink of a desperate scribe, recording the exact day the hungry makers of eternity finally walked away. This delicate, deteriorating scrap of dried river reed holds more profound historical gravity than the heaviest granite sarcophagus, preserving the raw, vibrating echo of mortal defiance against the crushing, overwhelming weight of an arrogant, failing bureaucracy that assumed absolute control. The stone speaks only of the victorious gods, but the fragile ink remembers the suffering of men. Immortality is not a divine right. It is an agonizing, labor-intensive, earthly construction. The grand illusion of supreme power shatters against the fundamental, unyielding reality of biological necessity, proving eternally that the most sophisticated architectures of human control remain helplessly tethered to the rhythmic, undeniable demands of the fragile, easily broken mortal stomach. When the sacred chisel is finally dropped into the blinding dust, the grand cosmic theater instantly collapses, revealing the terrifying vulnerability of those who claim divine authority over the weary, exploited masses who physically manifest their impossible, grandiose delusions of forever. The highest throne in the world cannot compel a starving man to carve another beautiful lie. Even the grandest eternity requires the blood and sweat of the desperate living. Let the cold, crumbling ruins of the Great Valley stand as a permanent, haunting testament to the ultimate fragility of absolute power. A solemn reminder that the glorious ascent to the immortal stars was always built upon the agonizing, crushing exhaustion of the earthly poor. The heavy silence that once descended upon the suffocating corridors of Deir el-Medina continues to echo through the long corridors of time, whispering a dangerous, indestructible truth that shatters the foundational myths of every great empire that dares to ignore its builders. As long as hunger exists, the machinery of the gods will always remain incredibly, tragically vulnerable. For without the humble hands of mortal men, the mighty gods have no home.